Sri Lanka. One will be read out will be read out by someone else, and the other two will be by the people themselves. So the first statement, which will be read, is from Dr. Kasapile Manoharan, well known as the father of his son Raghiyar, who was one of the 5 Tamil students killed while studying in Trincomalee, while hanging out at the beach, really, in Trincomalee. They were killed almost certainly by members of the Sri Lankan security forces in the case that came to be known as the Trinco 5. Dr. Manoharan knew the security forces were involved with the killings and was courageous enough to testify at an early inquiry. Despite their attachment to Sri Lanka, the Manoharan family felt it was wise to leave the country and have been out of the country for a while following death threats and following the murder of 2 key witnesses in the case. Unfortunately, Dr. Manoharan's wife died last year without knowing the truth of what happened to her son. And although Dr. Manoharan has testified in person at the Human Rights Council in the past, he asked that at this particularly difficult time for the family, his message be read for him on this occasion. So I'll give it, we'll now hear it read. Thank you. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you. I'm writing to thank you for your statement on 5th February, continuing to draw attention to the human rights situation in Sri Lanka. Victims in Sri Lanka desperately need your help to ensure accountability. I write to you here about the Trinco 5 case, an emblematic example of impunity. I would like this statement read out when you have your meeting on victims' rights on 1st March 2021. My beloved son Raghiyar was murdered by Sri Lankan forces on 2nd January 2006. Since that terrible day, I have campaigned for the truth about what happened. The last time I heard from my son Raghiyar was a mobile phone message. It just said, "Dad." That was 2nd January 2006. My son was a good boy and was celebrating finishing his exams with friends on the Trincomalee beach. That day, I heard a bomb blast on the beach, and 3 of my other sons returned home immediately. Raghiyar did not. Within minutes of the explosion, I got a call from him which said, "Daddy, the forces are surrounding me." He meant the security forces. That was all he said. Then there was silence, just the last unfinished text. I immediately rushed to the scene but was blocked by Navy guards who wouldn't let me through. I heard voices crying in Tamil, "Help us, help us." But I couldn't see properly as the lights where my son had been sitting near the Gandhi statue had purposefully been turned off. I then heard gunfire and lights go down near the statue. Because I'm a medical doctor who had treated the Navy, I was able to get access to the mortuary. I wanted to know if one of the bodies taken was my son. When I entered, the first body I saw was my beloved Raghiyar. He had 5 gunshot wounds. While I was there, a police officer wanted me to sign a statement saying my son was a Tamil tiger. If I agreed, they would release his body immediately. I refused. My son was a caring person. Raghiyar was a good student, a table tennis and a chess champion, and a coach. The government claimed my son was killed in a grenade attack, but 3 of the bodies I saw in the mortuary had had wounds, showing they had been shot in the back of the head. I have photographs, and the doctor's report confirms this. The entry hall was small, and the exit wound was big, indicating the boys were shot at very close range. They were executed. 5 young men whose whole lives were ahead of them. That evening, I made a decision. I would challenge the authorities to tell the truth. I had seen Sri Lanka's special task forces near the scene and wanted them to be investigated. From the moment I spoke out, I received death threats. My other sons were also threatened. The journalist, Mr. Sugirda Rajan, who came with me to the mortuary to take photos, was gunned down a few weeks later. His photos disproved the army's claims that the students were killed in an explosion. A Buddhist priest who condemned Raghiyar's murder was also killed. It was simply too dangerous for me and my family to stay in Sri Lanka. With heavy hearts, we left in December 2006. We lost our friends, medical practice, and property, but our biggest loss is Raghiyar. As a father, it's my duty to search for the truth. I have given video testimony to a commission of inquiry that was set up by former President Rajapaksa to investigate my case, more commonly known as the Trinco 5 case. Nothing came of these efforts. The government showed Government showed a lack of political will to acknowledge the role of the security forces. I could not stand idly by and decided to take my search for truth to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, lobbying UN member states to ask Sri Lanka to tell the truth. The Trinco 5 case has been included in the 2015 OISL report on Sri Lanka as an emblematic case of impunity, or in simple language, a state cover-up. 15 years on, the case remains stalled. It was proceeding as a non-summary case in a magistrate's court in Trinco, but on 3rd July 2019, the 13 Special Task Forces suspects were apparently released. How can the government fail to effectively investigate this case? This is a very serious murder case. The doctor's report from the mortuary acknowledges the gunshot wounds. I cannot have any trust in the Sri Lanka criminal justice system if they can't offer families like mine some answers. The government claims the case stalled due to the inability to track down witnesses abroad, but a serious murder case like this deserves a proper investigation, and a number of witnesses in Sri Lanka could still be interviewed. The Trinco 5 killings have been covered up because the security forces were involved. Before Ragihar died, he cried out to me for help. When justice is served, when Sri Lanka finally tells the truth about what happened to my son, then we can say that Ragihar's call for help has finally been heard. The Trinco 5 case is a litmus test of whether the Sri Lankan justice system is fit for purpose. In the absence of viable domestic avenues in Sri Lanka for accountability, the United Nations Human Rights Council must adopt a robust resolution on Sri Lanka. Please join me in asking the Sri Lankan government to ensure the Trinco 5 case is properly investigated. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you from a distance to Dr. Manoharan. I'm struck by there's perennially a debate whether the Sri Lankan government or representatives of the state will say, please give us time to let our domestic mechanisms work. We don't need international intervention. It's challenging our sovereignty. But I think if there's any case that articulates or makes clear the depth of impunity in Sri Lanka and the absolute inability and unwillingness of the Sri Lankan state to investigate crimes committed by its own agents, it's the Trinco 5 case. And now someone who knows a lot about that case and many others will speak to us, Mr. Ruki Fernando. He has been actively involved in human rights and social justice issues from 1997, and probably knowing him even before that, campaigning for justice for victims of human rights abuses from all communities, which is not always the case. He's a former board member of the Asia Forum for Human Rights and Development, known as Forum Asia, and a member of the executive committee of the Free Media Movement. So over to you, Ruki.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you to everyone who was attending this event. I think this event is particularly significant because it's not very often that we have an event where several special procedures are participating, discussing the situation of a particular country. And I think the report that the special procedures did, joint report or rather joint update assessment of the implementation of the recommendations, is also very unique. And I want to appreciate that. I know a lot of effort would have gone into that, and thank you very much for the event and also for that report. I also want to appreciate the fact that at least a summary of that report is in Sinhalese and Tamil. That made it very accessible to a lot of people in Sri Lanka, including survivors, victim families, and activists. And I hope that tradition too will continue. I think the theme of the event is time for action, but I think we are now in a situation where the ball is in the courts of member states of the council to take action. The High Commissioner has spoken, special procedures have spoken, many others have spoken, but now the ball is in the court of the member states. And from what we hear from different member states, including members of the core group, the actions are going to be very, very limited yet again, and it's going to be very disappointing to survivors, victim families yet again, after waiting for so long. This, I think, brings back memories of even as far back as 15 years, around 2006, when before the last phase of the war, the very bloody stage of the war, when the High Commissioner Special Procedures all called out for strong action by member states of the Human Rights Council, and that didn't happen. And then we saw bloodbath on the beach and so much carnage that followed. I hope that we don't reach that stage yet again when the High Commissioner Special Procedures, and many have spoken, but the member states have not listened. But I want to discuss a little bit about some things that I think the special procedures can consider, and also the High Commissioner's Office. I think more attention will have to be put on trying to engaging with member states to take action. Clearly, efforts of the High Commissioner and Special Procedures and all of us actually, including human rights defenders, convincing member states to take action in time, repeatedly failed. So I think this time might be, there's another imminent failure yet again. Particular maybe attention I think will have to be paid to different regions, particularly in the case of Sri Lanka. I think what made the 2014 OISL possible, the international investigation possible, is the support by some Latin American, African, and a few Asian states. And I think it will be good if Special Procedures and OSCHR also pay more attention to engaging with states in these regions to seek, when trying to get more states to take decisive action. And the second, I think, is in terms of the OSCHR's work in monitoring and analysis of the human rights situation in Sri Lanka, which is the first kind of suggestion or the recommendation the special procedures have made in your detailed report. I think it might be difficult, or there might be limits in doing this in Colombo. Particularly in terms of getting visas for people to come. But I think there are new opportunities to do this in Geneva. And this is an area, I think, the Special Procedures branch, the Special Procedure mandate holders and their staff and their various research assistants that they get through universities and other institutions can come into play. There are more and more human rights defenders in Sri Lanka, in different regions, in different districts, who are using online communication tools. They are becoming more conscious of using secure online communication tools. And I think this gives an opportunity for Special Procedures and OSCHR to engage more, to have more conversations, more dialogues, and to do monitoring remotely. And I hope that this opportunity will be taken up in the coming months and years when actual visits, face-to-face meetings are going to be difficult, not just because of COVID, but also because of the political situation. And also, I think it's important for Special Procedures to engage more robustly with states who can support, who have already commitments to support human rights defenders at risk, and also civilians who are at risk. And I think this must include action in Colombo through embassies who are present here in Colombo, but also actions in their own countries, particularly in reconsidering how refugee applications, asylum applications are considered. And I think the new context must be of militarization, and threats to minorities and dissenters must be taken into account. The last one is, I think, more or less to say what I already said, continue the kind of reports that you have issued already, the long joint report. And this shouldn't necessarily be done only when there is a significant Human Rights Council session like what we have right now. This could be done on a regular basis. I know this requires more resources, but I think that's the challenge, to get resources and to channel them for some productive and meaningful work. And I think the reports of the Special Procedure should ideally complement the High Commissioner's work. And there will be fixed times when the High Commission is asked to report to the Human Rights Council if the resolution in its present form goes through. But I think the Special Procedures can consider doing reports at times that the High Commissioner doesn't actually do a report. And I think that would be very important in keeping the international community well informed of what's the progress or the lack of progress being made in Sri Lanka in terms of reconciliation and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruki. I'm struck by a number of age-related things. I think what strikes me about that is the international community, the actual diplomats who work at the Human Rights Council only come in and out of focus on Sri Lanka, or Sri Lanka comes in and out of focus. Whereas those of us who live in Sri Lanka, who work on it for a long time, see the sort of the continuity and the depth of the problem, the institutionalized nature of these problems. And I think what we have now is a moment where we have sort of the full machinery focused on Sri Lanka, represented by the special mandate holders in their important statement, by the High Commissioner's statement, by the many reports from important human rights groups in Sri Lanka and out. So we now have sustained attention, which might begin to re-educate the diplomatic community about the depth and severity of what's happening in Sri Lanka. But sustaining that, I think, will be absolutely essential. We can't have it continue to sort of be this stop and start approach as it has been. Okay, enough editorializing. We next have Mr. Amir Faiz, who is a practicing lawyer in Sri Lanka, chairman of the Rural Development Foundation, and for many years he has been director of the Secretariat for Muslims and chairperson of the One Text Initiative, which is a cross-party team working on constitutional proposals to address the root causes of Sri Lanka's conflicts. So I'll pass it over to Faiz and look forward to what you have to say. Okay, Faiz, you need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the organizers for this event. And as the special rapporteur on minorities has summed it up, and what Ruki has said, nevertheless, it's the time for iteration of certain recent events. And I'm here to say a few words about the challenges facing the religious minorities. This is an extremely challenging and fearful time for religious minorities in Sri Lanka. A terrifying wave of ethno-nationalistic hatred is currently gripping the country. Violence against ethnic and religious minorities is posing a serious threat to their peaceful and dignified existence. Minorities such as Tamils and Muslims fear that the state is preparing to evict or drive them from certain areas where they live, even during the lethal pandemic. The religious minorities, the Hindus, Christians, and Muslims, are threatened with extreme discrimination, harassment, and attack. Hindus are being prevented from worshipping and engaging in religious practices in their ancient temples, particularly in the north and east, alleging that they are damaging archaeological monuments. Sites and objects of Hindu worship are being replaced by Buddha statues. The Hindus are facing attempts to oust them from their places of worship. Christians have been victims of more than 500 incidents of violence since 2015. Of those, 184 incidents were incidents of threats and intimidation. A further 276 incidents involved state officials as perpetrators, either explicitly or implicitly. In 2020, multiple pastors were questioned about their religious practices, the registration status of their churches, and the personal details of their congregants. Now there are renewed demands for banning of religious conversions. Then coming to Muslims, Muslims have increasingly become the target of hatred, state-sponsored injustice, and violence. Since the end of war in 2009, violent rhetoric has been unleashed against halal certification, the attire of Muslim women, Muslim houses, businesses, business properties, places of worship, and Muslim education. There have been hundreds of violent attacks against Muslims. The worst anti-Muslim violence in Sri Lanka's post-colonial history took place in the towns in central Kandy district in 2018. To date, no one has been prosecuted. Hard as it is to believe, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is being abused and weaponized to arrest Muslims arbitrarily and incarcerate them for exercising their right of freedom of expression and dissent. In contrast, hate-mongering extremist monks, mobs, and media enjoy impunity. Even the pandemic is being used to spread hate against the Muslims. Muslims were accused of being the introducers and carriers of the virus. Powerful media houses aligned to the government promoted stories that painted Muslims as unpatriotic and undisciplined, as the special rapporteur mentioned a little while ago. Incendiary monks publicly singled out Muslims for harsh, derogatory, and inflammatory attacks. Against this backdrop, and in furtherance of the hatred against religious minorities, the government derogated from the constitutionally protected right to bury those who had died from COVID-19. A conservative estimate is that more than 250 Muslims suspected of dying from COVID-19 have been forcibly cremated against the wishes of the families and without any scientific reason to do so. After the interactive dialogue on Sri Lanka here at the Council on 24th February, the Sri Lankan government lifted the ban on burial of COVID-19 victims. Possibly this was done in an effort to secure the support of Muslim member states. But even after several days, we are yet to witness a single burial taking place. The government has not even issued guidelines for safe burials. The latest that I hear today is that the government is looking for an uninhabited island to bury the COVID dead. The most recent twist is that the Justice Minister is reported to have recommended that for security reasons, the wearing of niqab, the face veil, in public places and public gatherings should be banned. In a country where the wearing of face mask is compulsory, this attempt to ban face veil defies all logic. What reason can there be other than anti-Muslim extremism and hatred? Further, is bartering of rights the way to go to assuage extremists and Islamophobes? Therefore, faced with this litany of threats and abuses, it is imperative that the Human Rights Council take every possible step to ensure the equal protection of Sri Lanka's ethnic and religious minorities and their human rights. This must be done at this session through a resolution on accountability, access to truth and justice, and the gathering of evidence. Sri Lanka must remain on the Council's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Faiz. All what you say makes a lot of sense, unfortunately. We now will have some remarks from two more of special rapporteurs. First, we will hear from Mr. Diego Garcia Sayan, the Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers. And then that will be followed by the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief, Mr. Ahmad Shahid. So first to Mr. Sayan.
Thank you, Alan, and congratulations, Clement, and hello to everybody for this very, very important gathering to pay some contribution to improve the severe situation suffering which is affecting Sri Lanka. The last report made by my predecessor was after a visit made almost 5 years ago. In that report, the rapporteur mentioned eventually recent democratic gains. Unfortunately, that is a phrase that couldn't be repeated now in 2021, as we really know, because we are suffering a context of weakening checks and balances and calling into question critical things as judicial independence, human rights investigation, and of course, the function of lawyers. Several issues may be mentioned in this context, but I will mention only three, which are especially relevant. First, the increased control by the President of the Republic of the fundamental keys of the judicial system, especially beginning in 2019 after the constitutional amendment promoted by the actual president in a very speedy process of 2 days in which these constitutional reforms were adopted in the Congress, and in which concentrates in the president the function of appointment and dismissal of senior judges and other high-ranking officials, An absolute power was given as well to the president on the composition of the Judicial Service Commission in charge of appointment, promotion, and transfer of other judges different from the high courts. So it's very difficult to find a context in which so transparently the concentration of power in the executive, in the president, is so open, so clear after these constitutional reforms adopted in 2019. Second aspect, which has been mentioned by many of the people that have very properly spoken today, is the blocking or militarization of investigations on past human rights violations and crimes affected by a permanent eroding intervention as well of the president. A presidential commission appointed in January last year, which intervenes directly in police investigations, judicial processes, and even in steps taken by the Attorney General, which are being systematically, very clearly and openly neutralized. And third, attacks, properly have been mentioned, the attacks on human rights defenders. I would add very clearly, attacks on lawyers, and attacks on lawyers, which as well, since aggravated since 2019, extending systematic harassments and detentions against lawyers, of course, and human rights defenders, like is the case of lawyers. He has Hezbollah, a serious representative of a Muslim minorities in human rights cases, who has fought in this area for many years, that was arbitrarily arrested more than 10 months ago. He has been incommunicado during the several months, lack of access to his lawyer, and held in detention for months without a charge until very recently. And of course, in this context, I cannot fail to mention that some important steps have been taken. I have not been in Sri Lanka recently, but in any case, I have received the information that in the last elections in the Sri Lanka Bar Association, a prominent lawyer connected to human rights cases has been elected as their president. So that gives an openness of hope that some strong activity may be promoted from the Bar Association to stop this liquidation of the function of lawyers in Sri Lanka. So I have just recalling some key aspects of this erosion of democratic institutions, the overwhelming anti-democratic steps taken by the government to destroy judicial independence, and the need, of course, that the Council of Human Rights take strong steps, issues a resolution regarding these aspects, and of course, as I guess many of us will share, open the possibility that the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, bearing in mind the lack of possibilities of real investigation of past human rights violations and of past breaking of international humanitarian law, be eventually investigated by the International Criminal Court. Thank you very much, Alan. Congratulations again, Clement, and nice to see you all in this really good gathering, in which I hope and I expect really that some specific and concrete steps to act against this deterioration, and that eventually, again, we could be able to say, well, some improvements are being taken place in Sri Lanka again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I share your hope that there will be action and improvement soon. Next to the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief, Mr. Ahmed Shahid. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Kieran. Congratulations, Clement, and thank you for bringing us all together to talk about a very, very concerning issue for all of us. I went to Sri Lanka in August 2019. And in the time since, of course, in my visit, I did come across a few voices amongst authorities of sanity and reason, but by and large, there was a denial to see that there was a serious problem in the country. In the time since, it's all been negative developments spiraling down at a very rapid rate, both in terms of institutional framework that is in place to support advance of human rights, as well as in various processes and actions that have been quite negative. And as human rights are indivisible and interdependent, I fully associate myself with the comments made by my colleagues and the issues they've identified and the negative impact they have in regard to the right to freedom of religion or belief. Mr. Faiz spoke very eloquently and movingly about the plight of people in the country, and I know what he said fully matches with what I have gathered from my various information gathering processes as to where the situation is in the country. It's a deeply alarming situation. Some of the primary areas of concern, as my colleagues already highlighted, include rampant impunity for rights violations and lack of any accountability for those violations. The widespread abuse of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, a matter I highlighted in my report, and as my colleagues also mentioned, an act that requires to be repealed. In my findings, targeting Muslims under the law. To date, there are about 300 in detention without charge. I also came across in my visit targeting of human rights defenders, especially lawyers. We just heard the name of Hijaz Hezbollah mentioned, a lawyer detained simply for the purpose of doing the work of a lawyer. And this, again, is a warning through his detention to others not to defend, in this case, Muslims who've been detained without charge. Again, held under the pretext of terrorism. A significant concern then and now is that families of victims do not get access to remedy. We just heard again testimony of how the state has totally either ignored or blocked access to such remedy, including truth about various attacks, as well as the Easter bombing. There have been 3 commissions to look into these bombings, and the report hasn't been satisfactory. None of them identified the main perpetrators behind the attack, and therefore the report has been rightly criticized for covering up the truth, including the role of various government institutions in the lead up to these attacks. As a previous speaker mentioned, the territorialization of religion, including a report on minorities mentioned, is a huge problem here, especially where the government appears to be on a massive, if you like, program to de-ethnicize, I suppose, other minority areas by planting, as it were, Buddhist symbols in these places. So essentially changing the character of these demographies, including place of worship for Hindus, especially in the north and in the east. So an encroachment of their areas of worship, and also by a sort of a colonization, as it were, through religious symbols. And others have highlighted the massive problems that have come with the pandemic, the stigmatization and persecution of minorities. And we've also mentioned, and I've raised a number of communications in this regard, about the forced cremation of persons who died from the COVID virus, in close to 300 in that now. And of course, the recent offer or recent promise of a change hasn't really been followed up with any real action to suggest that this was a bona fide shift in policy. So as I share the concerns raised here, that in addition to the, if you like, wave of hate speech targeting the minority of Sri Lanka, the Muslims are facing a very serious existential challenge in their country, including reports recently of proposal to have those who died of COVID pandemic taken out of the country, essentially signaling that the Muslims don't belong in Sri Lanka. This is an important message that should not be ignored by those who are watching the situation. Also, I highlight in my report that where reform measures are pursued, and there were some that I identified, I also that it's important that they are pursued in a way that they operationalize human rights principles, that the obligation of conduct is built into this. So if there is a move, as was necessary in my view, to reform the education system, the way it should be done should not further marginalize the minorities. It must be done in an inclusive way through participation of stakeholders, so that everyone benefits from these changes. I'm also deeply concerned by the recent announcement of a proposal to impose the ban, the full face veil ban. Again, a measure that is not justified, not warranted, and appears to be targeting a particular community. Again, adding on to the message that the Muslims are not welcome in Sri Lanka, and that is a very, very concerning message. I share Ruki Fernando's assessment of what has to be done, both in terms of where the ball is now, that the member states must act now at this point to ensure that there is no further slippage in the alarming deterioration in the country at the present time. And also, this must also include capacity building of civil society actors in the country to better document what's going on and to be able to organize themselves, but also working in the country and outside to promote the implementation of recommendations that we have made. And I think we also ourselves as rapporteurs need to think more of what else we can do. Mr. Fernando mentioned things like mobilizing awareness raising in various regional groupings, something we have to do. And also there are other ways of, I think, pursuing that, going upstairs, I suppose, in terms of demanding more accountability for what's been done. But for the moment, it is vital that this council session adopt a resolution that demands full accountability for what's happening in Sri Lanka, and that is an opportunity not to be missed. It will be missed with grave consequences for the communities in Sri Lanka. That's the warning we have to sound out today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shahid, for that completely timely and accurate warning. I think it's time for something strong from the Human Rights Council. But so we have a little bit of time left for Q&A, but first I'd like to pass it back to Clément Voul for his quick thoughts, and then to Q&A. We've got at least 4 or 5 questions, interesting questions lined up that I think we'd all like to get some answers for, or answers to. So first, Clément.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me. So thank you very much, Alan. I think since we are also running a little bit late, I will be really brief. I think I listened quietly a lot of testimony here, and it's clear for us that the theme that we choose is time for action is really relevant. And I think it's now important that Human Rights Council pay attention to the call for the victim, pay attention to those victims who are crying for justice. And it's really timely for the Human Rights Council to take very strong action to ensure that Sri Lanka states understand their obligation at the international level, but also to ensure also that a long gain that we have. I'm not saying that the situation was very good before, but at least we start seeing some sign of progress. And it's important that we prevent that this little progress that we saw can be rolled back. And it's important that this resolution also address really the core issue. And victim, we need to give justice to victim. And this resolution is quite important. And it will be a sign for the victim that the international community is listening to them. It will be a sign also for Sri Lankan government that they have to be bound by their international obligation. That is important to ensure accountability. It's important to ensure also that victims that are there for many years, crying for justice, that those victims are respected, that their dignity is respected. Because the fact that we as a rapporteur, for many years, almost 10 years, we went to Sri Lanka, we issue all of those recommendations. We didn't see any sign of implementation of this recommendation. And Sri Lanka government keeps saying that they want to cooperate with special rapporteur. And it's time for us now for them to implement our recommendation. And for us, one of the signs to really say that they cooperate with us is to implement our 400 recommendations that we issue until now. And for me, it's really important that this resolution reiterates that this resolution is clear about Sri Lanka implementing our recommendation. We stand ready as a rapporteur to continue to help the Sri Lankan government to cooperate to ensure that we provide our technical support for the government. And I want also really, in terms of remark, also thanks also many victims, many panelists that share their thoughts here. And I hope that they will go from here safely home. And it's important also to remind also that Human Rights Council adopt a resolution that requests states to not exercise any kind of reprisal against people that come before the Human Rights Council and give their testimony. It's important for Sri Lanka government to really respect their obligation, in particular, not exercising any kind of reprisal. And I want also to thank many states that are here, come to listen to us. And many of us mentioned that it's a time for individual states also to act. It's a time to individual states to support this action of council. It's not a sanction about Sri Lanka, it's helping Sri Lanka to overcome the human rights situation in the country. And we need to be strong enough to tell the Sri Lankan government, no, it's enough. We cannot, for many years that the international community is investing in this country. We need to see the lights. And I want to thank all of you. I want to thank also the victim for sharing that. And I hope that through this, through our discussion, we will also have some participants that can bring their perspective. And I hear also some of them say how we can move forward. But I want also to ensure that for my mandate perspective and for other of my colleagues, we stand ready to continue to help to support victims and to listen to them, to bring the attention of Human Rights Council to the suffering of the victim in Sri Lanka today. Thank you very much, Alan.
Well, thank you. I was struck just for any member states out there or diplomats or representatives to know not only your warning about reprisals is not only a sort of a future possibility, but there's past precedent. Sri Lankan human rights defenders have been actively harassed both in Geneva and back home in Sri Lanka for their engagement with the council, which of course is absolutely not permitted, but happens anyway. So we have 5 questions. So let's hop on the question ladder here. And maybe the first one I'll ask, we'll go to Lee Toomey, because it follows very much on your Clément Voule's very spot on question about what constitutes full cooperation. So the Sri Lankan government has said that it's fully cooperating with the special procedures. It touts their engagement with you. But of course, as your own very important report earlier this year has pointed out, that doesn't actually mean they implement what you ask. So the question is to you, Ms. Toomey, what do you think actually should constitute full cooperation? What would it mean? What would make that claim by the Sri Lankan government or some other government actually meaningful?
Thank you, Alan. I think for my mandate, working on arbitrary detention, that it would be meaningful to see a real drop in the number of people being detained. You know, the statistics need to reflect government action. We need to see fewer people on extensive remand. We need to see the cases moving more quickly through the courts, lesser claims of arbitrary detention, more bail, more alternatives to detention being offered. That would be very concrete and real to us. We've asked many times for those who've been arbitrarily detained to be released and compensated. First step, immediate release, and then other reparations. And to see that actually start happening would be a real and concrete measure for our mandate. While I have the floor, actually, I just wanted to draw attention to the fact we've been talking a lot about how we can follow up, and my mandate, unlike most other special procedures, has a particular function of adopting opinions. And that's a way that we can continue to draw individual cases to the attention of the government. Of course, it just results in more recommendations that aren't followed, but at least it's a way, unlike country visit reports, of being able to highlight very specifically the violations and arbitrary detention in each case where we so find. So I want to bring that to participants' attention. That has been largely underutilized in the case of Sri Lanka. Since we visited in December 2017, we've only had one case brought to us from Sri Lanka. So it's definitely another measure of keeping that momentum and keeping the spotlight and the focus where it needs to be on the government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question for Ruki that I think follows nicely onto that one, although it's a huge question. We only have, just so everyone knows, we only have about 15 minutes left to keep to schedule. Of course, we can go over a little bit maybe if we're really going, but let's try to keep answers, even when they're really big questions, let's keep them as tight as possible. So Ruki, here's the challenging question for you. For decades, Sri Lankan victims from all communities have taken significant risks in bringing the facts and their life stories to the UN and the Human Rights Council in particular. Today, many are disappointed and fearful. Should they be? What can be done to respond more effectively to their plight?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that there are less complaints to the special procedures is also because many survivors and victim families feel that they have done it before and nothing has changed for them. The only thing that has changed for them is that they get more harassed and they face more threats and intimidation. So they think, what is the point? So they are quite justified, I think, in that feeling. So I think maybe one of the important things, and I understand this is a structural problem, but I think it is a structural problem for many years. It has to be overcome, is the fact that it takes several months for a survivor or a victim's family who sends a complaint to the special procedures to know whether that has been taken up with the government or not. I think the system has improved somewhat now compared to many years ago, but still 3 months is a long time to wait to know whether your complaint has been even taken up or not. And also, I think it's important, certain special procedures, like I think the working group on enforced disappearances, for example, has had a habit of or a practice of informing the survivors and victim families what has been the response of the government. And there has been some form of a continuous engagement. But in the case of many other special procedures, due to constraints of human resources, there has been no follow-up communication with survivors and victim families who send complaints. So I think these are actually the very absolutely basic minimum things that the UN structure, the UN system has to try and improve. Otherwise, I think we can't expect survivors and victim families to have faith, even in the system of special procedures.
Yeah, thank you, Ruki. I think actually, from an outside perspective, it's quite striking that so many victims and survivors and their representatives continue actually to petition the Human Rights Council and even domestic mechanisms within Sri Lanka, despite the fact that that they actually haven't delivered anything. Ambika, is a question for you, which is not actually totally unrelated, and I'm sure you have a helpful answer to this. The Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission that you were on conducted an inquiry into the anti-Muslim violence that happened in April 2018 in central Sri Lanka in the Kandy district. The evidence gathering was done from May 9th to 12th in Kandy, with the participation of at least 3 members of the Human Rights Commission. It was initially stated that the report will be made available by July of that same year, 2018. However, despite the fact that 3 years have passed since the violent events, we've not seen a report yet. Can Ms. Satkunanathan explain what happened to the report and what has caused the delay?
Well, what has happened to the report? The report is probably sitting somewhere in the commission, not been published yet, and I doubt it will be published now, with the current board. Why was there a delay? Well, the report was drafted and then the procedure was to obtain the consent of all the commissioners, and the chairperson also had to approve it. So that process took time, and then it was 2019 and the Easter attacks happened. And then it was felt that perhaps that might not be a good time to release it, and to also look into what happened post-Easter in terms of the anti-Muslim violence. So that was also done, and that was also, the draft was prepared. But as when I resigned from the commission in March 2020, which was about nearly a year ago, it had not been published, and to date it is not. So that is deeply regrettable, because I think the civil society, and particularly the victims, had expectations, and it's a very important document that would have also traced patterns, and an authoritative document coming from the Human Rights Commission. So it's definitely regrettable, yes.
Okay, thank you, Ambika. Let's hope maybe it will emerge somehow surreptitiously or officially at some point. Faiz, there's a question for you. The question is, human rights violations against minorities, and in particular against Muslims, have been widespread since 2009. The very recent one is, as you've mentioned, the forced cremations policy for COVID-19 victims. This last one has had a massive impact on the minority Muslim community in Sri Lanka. What are some of the broader patterns, however, of violations that go beyond this against Muslims, in addition to the cremations? I think you covered some of that already in your presentation, but perhaps fill out some more for us, please.
Well, the broader violations that emanate from the structural violence that have been there for a long time, and as the question itself indicates, from 2009, it had been it's probably, you know, the government or the political powers that we are looking for another enemy for purpose of retaining power. For that, you know, an enemy had to be invented, and for that it was and also ongoing Islamophobia that's around the world is also being cleverly used in order to disseminate untruth, and also to instill some form of phobia in the minds of the larger community, so that it goes and it goes virtually, you know, the attacks are against the culture, the identity manifestation of Muslims in some form or the other, and also the hitherto enjoyed some special or some cultural rights are also being looked at as being privileges that are being enjoyed by Muslims. Say, for example, the personal laws of the Muslims in terms of marriage and divorce. And then, I mean, when the community itself was, you know, clamoring for reform within the personal laws and some of the cultural practices, now comes this the violence or the larger patterns, virtually state sponsored or the government sponsored patterns to discriminate Muslims. And also there is also a form, I mean, it's also the Muslim businesses are the rhetoric against Muslim businesses, saying that, you know, Muslims are enjoying disproportionate wealth and disproportionate share of the economy and all that, which is absolutely incorrect, and the statistics go to prove. And also the canard with regard to the population increase, you know, half the majority population have been made to believe that by come 2050 the country would become, or the Muslims would become majority in this in Sri Lanka, which is far-fetched, and it's not going to happen. Even the statisticians, the government statisticians themselves have come out and said, you know, debunked that canard. But then this is going on, and this the whole pattern is to subjugate the minorities, and also to, you know, I mean, to instill some form of fear. And again, it goes to the fundamentals that, you know, the minorities, particularly whether the Muslims or the Tamils or religious minorities, need not be treated as equals. You know, the larger the ideology is that, you know, all are welcome to stay in this country as guests, and please do not try to be equal or claim any equality. Thank you.
Thank you. I remember a famous statement by then General Sarath Fonseca to that extent, that this is a, you know, sort of articulating the classic Sinhala Buddhist nationalist position that Tamils and Muslims are welcome, but they need to know their place. Unfortunately, that attitude is now enshrined at the highest levels of the government. Here's a question for, I think, the special rapporteurs. I'm not sure who would be best placed. All of you probably would be well placed, but perhaps Professors de Varenne and maybe Professor Shahid also. Your statement, your joint statement clearly underlines that public acceptance of many of your 400 plus recommendations is meaningless in the absence of implementation. The High Commissioner points to the need for preventive action in light of new emerging trends and some old trends, as we've seen, of human rights violations. Does the Human Rights Council prevention mandate, recently clarified through Council Resolution 45/31 from last year, offer a constructive way forward on both fronts? How do the special procedures see their role as part of this larger prevention framework? Any takers for that question?
I think I'll have to answer more broadly because I'm not actually familiar with the content of the resolution. I wish I had the text in front of me if someone could send it to me. Prevention should be the cornerstone of many of the activities and efforts of the United Nations, not only in relation to human rights. And in fact, if I can make a connection with some of the activities and the priority of my mandate this year, the priority of my mandate this year is the prevention of conflict and the protection of the human rights of minorities. And in a broader sense, it is a situation of denial of the rights of minorities, which quite often lead to violence, conflict, and atrocities. And if I can extend that a little bit, I think what we are seeing in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, has some of the characteristics of extreme nationalism that is exclusionary of minorities in particular, and creates conditions where, unfortunately, we may actually have more violence and even atrocities. And in fact, we've heard of some of them today. One of the efforts of the activities that I have in relation to that theme, in a sense, is that we need to address much more directly prevention, particularly prevention of that involves the violations, the breaches of the human rights of minorities, because that is one of the main causes of conflict and violence in the world today, as a matter of fact. And I think, without proposing anything more concrete, I wanted to mention that we are focusing on that this year and hopefully coming up with something where we need to take further steps. And particularly in relation to my mandate, we are looking at what should be done beyond a declaration of the United Nations on the rights of minorities to try to make this more effective. To be very honest, the rights of minorities are often the rights that are the most vulnerable in societies where you have a rise of nationalism. So that's one step we're taking. We're going to be holding regional forums on that theme in different parts of the world, including Asia Pacific. But I'll have to answer in this general sense because I actually don't know the content of the resolution that is referred to.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Well, just let me plug the most recent commentary that we published from the crisis group that I wrote, which emphasizes the prevention aspect and which quotes from a little bit from and gives a suggestion for how the Human Rights Council can follow up in the current resolution on Sri Lanka to invoke the High Commissioner's new mandate or sort of strengthened mandate on prevention. So that might be worth looking at. Does anyone else want to tackle this important preventative question?
If I may just quickly add, part of the work we do is in a sense preventive in terms of highlighting, root causes that come. The key elements of that would be, identifying the root causes and trying to address that, and also promoting domestic capacity where there is to prevent this from happening. So in this particular context, I would think it'd be important for special rapporteurs and also other parts of the human rights machinery to be more focused on what's happening in the country, to raise the alarm, as it were, and possibly even take this concern, I said, higher up the chain, as it were, and we can discuss what that is. But clearly, applying things like the risk assessment framework developed by the UN Office on Genocide Prevention, not because it is there, but because there is a series of steps that they identify, which we can see happening in Sri Lanka. Impunity for violations of rights is a significant issue. The lack of independence of institutions, the rampant hate speech, all of these are risk factors identified in the framework. So applying that framework, applying the work we do, and also kicking up slightly up the chain, including the Security Council, where there can be a way to be heard by us, are all things we can do to advance the preventive mandate of the Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else or? Okay, well, we've come to 6 to 4. Well, actually, it's in London. Your time. Who knows what time this is on actually? But Geneva time. It's 5:45 in the evening. Maybe I guess we should probably wrap up unless people want to. There is a couple more questions. I don't know. I'm not sure how strong my mandate is. Maybe ask one more question. There's one very general question. Which is, if I can find it, it's since the zero draft resolution of the core group is a far cry from the UN human rights, from the UN High Commissioner's recommendations, and not likely to end up in a meaningful resolution on Sri Lanka. Now, I think some would disagree with this, but in any case, in what way can the human rights community continue there's the larger struggle using the High Commissioner's recommendations. So in other words, many people felt the High Commissioner's report was very strong and very accurate. And it's inevitable, I think, that the actual resolution that gets passed, whatever that is, if it gets passed, will fall short. So how can we keep sort of the flame alive for the broader claims and the more ambitious agenda that the High Commissioner sketched out, and I think which is very consistent with your joint statement from all of your special rapporteurs. Mm-hmm. And this can go also to, this can go to anybody. It's a very open-ended, big question. Ruki has a hand up, but maybe Professor De Varenne. Okay.
Can I take it? Who is okay? Oh, Alan seems to have a problem with his connection, right?
No, I think Clément, if you'd like to address that question first.
No, while Alan is trying to come back, I just wanted also to say that as our report, our communication also, our last press release and analysis, but also the High Commissioner report also pointed out, there is here for me, we need to look beyond also the council. You know, I mean, the council can do his piece, but I think also there is here the responsibility of each country. The same way that some countries may have their own bilateral cooperation with Sri Lanka, I think when it comes to when the country is not willing really to end impunity, the cycle of impunity, is it also the responsibility for other countries that really care about the protection of victims to also exercise, I mean, what the international norm give us, like universal jurisdiction, to exercise against those who violate or those who are accused of grave human rights violation. The individual states can also explore the possibility of the sanctions, individual sanction against those who committed grassroots violation. And I think for me, it's important when the state is not ready, because we are talking about here 10 years now, nothing is going, nothing around the ending and impunity. And I think not all the country need to hide behind Human Rights Council and say that the countries need individuals to take their responsibility by exercising universal jurisdiction against those who are the perpetrators of grave human rights violation, but also impose target sanction against people that continue to violate human rights in Sri Lanka and are not ready now, are not ready to stop.
If I can perhaps just react also, I think it is very important, in addition to emphasizing full respect and equal respect of all human rights, particularly the rights of those who are most vulnerable, minorities. This has to be looked from an international peace and security point of view. I am extremely concerned that the situation here will destabilize not only the country, but it might actually have ripples in the region itself. And therefore, there is not only an issue of the Human Rights Council and states taking a more active role in bilateral and other relations. I think that we should actually emphasize the danger here of atrocities reaching a critical point and ethnic purification. I forget how to say this in English. I think even the UN Security Council, that states should begin to emphasize, to highlight this issue as a potential threat to international peace and security, because in my opinion, we are heading in that direction in Sri Lanka.
Okay, thank you very much. I was kicked out by my Wi-Fi, so I don't know what happened before you spoke, Professor. Ruki, have you had a chance to talk?
No, should I talk now?
Go for it, yeah. And then we can wrap up soon, I think.
Okay, so it's not only the Sri Lankan government and other member states of the UN that have failed Sri Lankans in protecting their rights. The UN has also failed in protecting the rights of Sri Lankans. And I think the UN might be failing again in this Human Rights Council session and the resolution. But I think there has been exceptions like the High Commissioner and the Special Procedures who have stepped up at particular times, like right now. And I think one important way is that the Special Procedures continue to do regularly what they did a few weeks ago through their assessment of the 400 recommendations. And I think that needs to be done regularly, and that will be one way of keeping Sri Lanka in the international spotlight in the absence or in the inadequacy of any Human Rights Council action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruki. Well, I think we should probably wrap up. We're gone a bit over, and people are beginning to have to move on to other meetings. But perhaps Clément Voul, do you have some final thoughts? And then I'll just say a couple of words and we'll say goodbye.
Yes, I just wanted to really thank all of our panelists, victims, those who come here. Really encourage people to share their testimony with us to show really the importance and the gravity of the situation that we trying to show in our press release, because we always say that when you have faces talking is better than just reading what is true. What we're trying to do there is really to translate people's suffering. And we want this also for the council to know that we are not, it's not just a piece of paper that we put there. It's the people suffering, if a victim crying, asking justice, asking at least a heal, at least the beginning of something that helped them also to know that somebody is listening to them. And for me, it's really important also that we really, through the action, beyond this resolution, individual country also start really taking seriously the situation in Sri Lanka, what is going on, and take action at their country level. I want also to end to thank all the victims, to thank my colleague, but also thank also all our support staff that helped to put this together, particularly Federica Donetti, but also Livia Kozensta, but also Stefan Waller, who also, and Flora, who also helped quietly to help us to really listen to ourselves here, but also thank many states that I saw here that also come to listen to victims. It's not to listen to us, they come to listen to victims. And I think this is important for victims to know that somewhere, some country care about their suffering. And we need to join hands. We need to continue to help Sri Lanka government to end this cycle of impunity. We need also to ensure so that the country do it, no matter what country will raise as their national sovereignty or whatever. But what we are doing here, what we are trying to tell them is that you have to help your citizens to live together, to live in peace. Minorities, civil society is really important for any democracy. You cannot achieve the sustainable development if you still going after civil society. And it's important that this Sri Lanka government see our action today as action to cooperate, our action to help the country, to ensure that victims are not forgotten. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was all very important. Maybe my thoughts are, first of all, thank you to everybody pulling this off, the people behind the scenes and the people up front and all the people they represent in Sri Lanka, all the people they're trying to speak for, even though that's always inadequate. All the people you, the special rapporteurs, met on your various visits. And to the council, I think you have some capacity to do something here, all the member states, to make as strong a resolution as possible. But that's never going to be enough. And I think there's so many more things that multilateral institutions, development agencies, bilateral donors, militaries, all around the world have lots of engagement with Sri Lanka. And there's lots of ways of sending very strong messages, both in policies and direct messages about the need to contain, to hold back, to prevent things from getting worse. Because we've already heard about how many victims there have been, and let's please do whatever we can to prevent the production of more victims and the making matters worse. So I think with that not totally articulate conclusion, I will thank you. I thank everyone. Thank you for giving me the chance to moderate. It's been fun, and it's been about a very important topic, and let's hope there's some action soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alain. Thank you for your good moderation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
I'll say goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bon courage.
Merci.